Composer Angelica Negron, welcome to Cultural Attaché.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
It is an eventful next few months for you, isn't it? I mean, you have the world premiere of For Everything You Keep Losing with the Dallas Symphony Orchestra, October 16th through 18th, and that's a requiem, isn't it?
Yes, it's a piece in the style of a requiem. I would say my most ambitious work yet, for orchestra, chorus, and for soloists.
Great, and we will talk about that. You also, on November 11th, have curated a program for LA Philharmonic's Green Umbrella series that's called Recovecos.
Yeah, I'm really excited about that one. Yeah, that's going to be a very special one.
And because you can't rest, you are also having the world premiere of a cello concerto with the LA Philharmonic, with Yo-Yo Ma as the soloist in May with the Los Angeles Philharmonic.
Yes, really thrilled to be a part of Gustavo's last season with the LA Phil and to be writing my first concerto ever for the one and only Yo-Yo.
You know, if you're going to do it, you might as well aim high, right?
Yes, yeah. I think it's been a few months of me thinking that it was that what was I doing? It's a crazy thing, but then I realized that it is actually the perfect person to be writing a concerto and my first one. So it all fell into place.
That's great. Well, before we talk about what's coming up, let's go back in time, say, maybe about 15 years, 16 years or so. But you did an interview with Music USA in 2009. And you said in
Oh
the
God.
that was a while ago, wasn't it?
Yes.
And you said in the end, the music that I like to write is the music I want to listen to. How has the music you like to listen to evolved in the 15 years since that interview? And how has that influenced what you want to write?
Wow. I'm glad that that still holds up and feels and resonates true. I feel like at the core, the music and the art that I'm drawn to, besides aesthetics, it really it has to do with a shared sensibility of humanity and of authenticity. I'm always really drawn to that. Same with experimentation. And that doesn't necessarily have to translate into experimental sounds, but just curiosity for experimenting. And I'm drawn to artists that are endlessly curious, and I'm also drawn to artists that are unapologetically themselves and to the work they create. Um, so I think that has stayed the same. I'm definitely I have definitely grown as a composer and have had the fortune um, to work with many new collaborators, people that I didn't know back then, people that I admired then and never even dreamt that I would meet them in person or write for them or collaborate on something. And my career has brought me to that. So I think um, it's very similar to what I was listening to at that time and what I was wanted to write and listen to, but at the same time, it's just ever more expansive and it just keeps growing and growing.
Well, and I assume as new opportunities present themselves, the number of people who want to collaborate with you just gets larger as well, right?
Yeah, and I think that I feel very lucky that I get to yeah to work with people that again I've never even could dream of working with them and also even more lucky to get to know people that I didn't know existed, just people that are making really interesting work and that my work has brought me to theirs and and now they've become collaborators and sometimes in multiple projects, not only just a one-off, but just like these sustained collaborations and long-lasting relationships are really important to me.
Now, let's talk a little bit about your Requiem for Everything You Keep Losing. A Requiem is an ambitious piece of music to write, and there are long shadows, as you well know, cast by, some little known people like Mozart and Verdi and Britten and Brahms, and even more contemporarily, Ligeti and Part.
Yep,
And I'm wondering,
both who I love.
right, so, you know, how how do you get past that? Oh my God, all these great works were done by these people so that you aren't intimidated in the process of creating your own requiem.
Such a great question. I feel like to be honest, panic about it for a little bit and pretend that it's not affecting me, but really it could be very paralyzing. And then same thing that happened when I wrote my first symphony a few years ago. I've written many orchestral works, but a symphony felt like very different. And also the same thing you were just talking about, this historical baggage that comes with it. I think when there's a point in the creative process that I realize that I'm making it so it can be anything I want it to be. And that it's not that I have to pay reverence or respect to the ones that were before me, or that I have to break traditions and do something completely different, that those two can coexist and that I can do my own thing in the middle, that it's not about one or the other. So that I think has been really liberating, just to realize that this can be about what I want to say, and also I can make it my own. And at the same time, that if I'm invited by these organizations and orchestras to write these works, that it is precisely because of my own unique perspective. Um, and yeah, I think when I say it, it makes sense, but it weighs very heavy when I'm writing. But I feel like there comes a time in which I just kind of let go and embrace the fact that um that this is my own thing, and I trust that all the things that I love and respect from the people that have come before me, um I'm channeling them, and they're infiltrating the work in different ways
Well,
that
there's
are
also
authentic to me.
right, and there's also that Sondheim lyric in Sunday in the Park with George, anything you do, let it come from you, then it will be new. You
Oh,
don't
I
get,
love that. I'm
yeah,
gonna write that down. I love that.
you should check out that musical if you've never
Hmm.
seen it. But because it is about the artistic process, but you don't hear the music the same way they heard music, so no reason to think that you can't come up with something equally valid, and
Exactly.
I know
And
you
I
can.
Exactly. And I come from a very different background, a very different culture, and I talk a lot about how people that look like me and that come from the place that I come from are really underrepresented in classical music. And when I'm hungry for those voices, it's because I want to hear their perspective. I would be incredibly bored if I hear Requiem from a Caribbean composer that wants to sound like Verdi. Um, Not to say that I need my Requiem to have my maracas and then be a performance of Latinidad. That's not what I'm looking after, but I do want that specific Caribbean sensibility that only that person can have. That um, yeah, I think that's what's gonna keep classical music alive, and what keeps people going, hopefully, to see
And for,
themselves reflected as well.
right, and for people who don't know where you're from, since you said where you're from, you are from a fabulous island that is giving the NFL its next, Super Bowl halftime entertainer call, and that's a
Yes.
wonderful place called Puerto Rico.
Yeah, very special tiny island in the Caribbean, that has, besides many beautiful sights, sounds, um, and delicious food, also incredible amount of talent.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and some really, really nice people.
I would like to think so. Yes,
Yes. Yeah,
definitely.
I've
Yeah.
been. I
Yeah.
love Puerto Rico. Um, so obviously when you take on a form like a requiem, there are
Mhm.
certain challenges that you have to overcome yourself and certain goals that you had for it. At the beginning, what were those challenges that you set for yourself in composing for everything you keep losing?
I I knew I wanted to. to write something that, of course, addressed loss because that's essentially what a requiem is. But I knew that I didn't want it to be a heavy, dense, or sad piece. So one of the big challenges for me was to not ignore that, but also focus on light. I think this is a piece that's very much looking towards light um, without necessarily thinking of without it being utopic or neglecting huge losses that we've had and in the case of this piece specifically, that is very much thinking of the climate crisis and species extinction and how our natural soundscapes have changed significantly. So I think one of the big challenges was that trying to keep it. I think light is a good way for because for me it describes intention and also density. And it's not necessarily positive, but just like focus um, on light, and that reflects in the instrumentation. I'm not using a bass or a baritone in this. It's the soloists are soprano, mezzo, countertenor, and tenor. So by design, it's also a lighter texture, and yeah, and I wanted to create something that felt contemporary in the sense that it resonated with contemporary issues without necessarily losing the specificity that sometimes when we're dealing with topics that are so broad and so overwhelming and huge, like climate crisis can be. So I wanted this to address that, but also address it from a very specific and particular perspective. Um, and naturally that is one that is connected to the island that I'm from Puerto Rico. And so I'm thinking of loss not only in terms of sounds that we've lost, just due to habitat loss, but also I'm thinking of how that intersects with issues like disaster capitalism, which is affecting a lot the island and which is connected also to the climate crisis. If you look at Puerto Rico throughout the years, but most recently after Hurricane Maria, and loss of, for example, language. That there are places in Puerto Rico that I go now and that I hear only English, and it's because my people have been displaced from those places, directly connected to the climate crisis. So thinking of loss in a very expansive way, that is hopefully resonant with people that are not from the island, but that also reflects my own unique perspective that's specific to the people that I love and the land that I care about.
In reading through the text of the Requiem, I was so moved by the very last line of text in it, which is Buscar del Silencio, which
Mm.
is search the silence. And I love discussing with composers, when we're dealing with music, what is the role of silence within the music?
Oof, I think a lot about silence. This piece is about silence, very much so, even though I'm feeling it with sound. It is very much inspired by sounds that are no longer there that we once had in our environment. Um, and but it is as much about that as it is about the human need to fill in those silences with meaning, with empathy, with action, with whatever we can. So I mean there's a movement in this piece, the Agnus Dei, that uses the sound of the depleted coral reefs. Um, and musically, and when I was writing it, it felt so awkward and so empty, but I was like, it's important to sit in this silence in this moment, because these coral reefs used to be so active with snapping shrimps and many creatures, just like a whole underworld symphony. And many of them now are so quiet. So it's important also, especially in a piece like this, to sit in that discomfort. But yeah, silence. I mean, I'm a huge a follower of John Cage's not only music but philosophy too, and about thinking that there's never truly silence and that there's always something there to listen for. So I think in a piece like this, especially by focusing on moments of quote unquote silence, it is really um hoping that people can like the idea of the silence being almost deafening because it's kind of focusing on an attention to listen to the absence that we are in part in great part responsible for.
So when you're in an audience and silence plays as profound a role in your work as it does in this particular piece, can you sense in watching the audience or listening to them when they're comfortable with the silence and when they're not?
Oof. I think in premieres I'm often so nervous about all the elements and my head is going a million miles of like being super grateful, being present, being nervous, being stressed, or judging myself of that brass chord that maybe I should have orchestrated differently. It's all those things happening simultaneously that I don't allow myself too much to be present in that way. I do. Um, I am able to do that in repeated performances, which I have I'm super lucky that I get to do this. We get to hear it 3 times, which is a luxury for composers, especially in large scale works. So I'm hoping that I can pay some more close attention to that on the second and third performances. But it is, I mean, it's part of live music, it's those things you can, even if I'm not able to process them at the moment, I can reflect on them later. You do really feel the impact or even or if it's not resonating with people, I feel like there's something in live music environments and in concert halls and spaces in which we gather to hear something together that there's a shared kind of sensibility that you can feel.
One of the things I've always loved about watching Gustavo Dudamel conduct, particularly a piece that ends quietly, is that he holds the baton
Mm.
in the air for what would be for most people an uncomfortable amount of time, so people could sit in the experience of the music and not feel the need to applaud or get on their
Yeah, that's so important.
and powerful too.
Yeah, 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 taking it in. Yeah, and that hall, oh my God, also. I like the Meyerson Hall also. Both of those are some of my favorite halls. Have this incredible acoustic and resonance that is just that I mean, I the piece I wrote for the LA Phil a few years ago plays a lot with that, with resonance and echo and like play an attack and a note and let it resonate and see how long we can fill that space with. But I'm really glad you also mentioned that line of the poem because it's one of my favorite ones. I'm using 4 different poets that I love from Puerto Rico, and this is a line from Amanda Hernandez, who I've worked with in the past, and the whole text is in English. It's translations from these poems that exist in English and Spanish, or that the poets themselves or colleagues translated. Um, and I struggle with that a lot with it, like writing. My native language is Spanish, and a lot of the times if I'm writing pieces for ensembles that are based in the US, the text ends up being in English. And I struggled with this piece with the language component a lot. And then at the end of the piece, it kind of revealed itself with this poem by Amanda that has this beautiful line that says, I will gather my things, run towards the mountain, forget how to speak English. And then I was like, oh, okay, in Paradisum, the last movement, it's paradise is really being able to return home. And I was like, what if after the chorus says forget how to speak English, they actually forget, and the last few lines of the piece are in actual Spanish. Um, and and the very last line, as you said, is buscar el silencio. Um, so yeah, it's I feel like every piece it's me trying to find ways to navigate um not only my place in classical music, but also my place in being a Puerto Rican artist that's making work that's primarily being played in the US.
Well, it's also interesting because that changes the meter of the language changes the meter of the music as well. It's,
Mm-hmm.
search the silence is 4 syllables. Buscar el
Mm-hmm.
silencio is more than that.
Oof, and it's also, I don't know, like, I mean, I'm partial, but the Spanish language has just such a cadence and a weight to it in some words that it's sits heavy. So yeah, it's yeah, language is another kind of music too that has its own rhythm and its own cadence um and I think it's for me, I think a lot about meaning making, especially the more time I'm away from Puerto Rico. I've been here for almost 20 years now. So sometimes I think in Spanglish. Sometimes I'm in Puerto Rico and say a word in English because that's what comes first. So instead of thinking of one or the other or being ashamed of being a Puerto Rican that sometimes says things in English, um, or being ashamed that my English is not perfect in English speaking spaces. I think for me growing older and has also meant embracing more that as a unique part of who I am, and that is just it is very much so also part of Puerto Rican identity, which is so complex with our relationship to the US and so fluid.
One thing that I love about the Puerto Rican identity is showcased in the Kyrie movement,
Mm,
um, because I fell in love with the sound of coqui frogs.
mm.
I just like I recorded it with my phone. That's how much I love that sound. And I know that they're a threatened species in Puerto Rico, but beyond that, is there something about their identity or the mythology that surrounds them that inspired your use of or representation of their unique sounds, in the Requiem?
Yeah, the coquille holds, I mean, it's one of my favorite sounds too. It's talking about silence. It's one of those sounds that I took for granted when I lived in the island. And when I moved, I was like the silence was in the night soundscapes was deafening to me. I was like, it's so quiet. And it's because it's very loud when you're there at night. But when you live there, you take it for granted. But at the same time, as you say, like the coquille is such a symbol of national identity and also is such a symbol of resilience too. There and resistance as well. So mostly it's a resistance actually is what I meant to say. Because I mean, I think there's like sayings that there are a few coquilles in Hawaii. But really the thing is that you can't take it away from Puerto Rico. It won't survive outside of the island. And that's used a lot in short stories and in Puerto Rican literature and as a metaphor for Puerto Ricans, right? And and sometimes in humorous ways of like how we can, how we're always cold in the U.S. or when we're in places that have winter, but also it's used as like there's always this kind of need to go back to the island, like the coquille. So for me in the Kyrie, it's I'm using the sounds of the Afro-Caribbean bomba, which is music of resistance too. And the coquille that we often associate the octave leap like I'm not a great whistler, but that iconic coquille sound, they're not a threatened species, but there are a few others, like the coquille wajon, which is the one I'm using in this one, that we've lost due to habitat loss and the climate crisis. So it's for me, it was a just a perfect connection of resistance with Puerto Rican identity with a sound that I wasn't even as familiar with because it's not part of the soundscape because we've lost it a couple decades ago.
Right. Um, I read your program notes,
Mm.
um, for everything you keep losing. And there was a sentence that really stood out to me where you said, the piece also asks how music and technology can help us reconnect with what has been lost and imagine new ways forward. And, I'm thinking we're living in a time where, as human beings, technology is sort of putting us into silos where we're relying on technology and not, say, going to the park and striking up a conversation with a stranger,
Right.
or we're dealing with our political belief systems or religious or
Mm.
whatever it is that we think is the best marker of identification. Compare, at the same time, we're dealing with constant reports about how technology is going to overtake humankind because of everything that AI will ultimately, they
Right.
believe, develop into. So, what is your view of technology itself and its future and how that might impact our future?
Yeah, I mean, I all those things that you mentioned, I feel deeply and also I'm very worried about. At the same time, same as I was mentioning before of like multiple things coexisting, I think it's important to not ignore that. Obviously, it's a huge part of the contemporary reality and how we're interacting with or not interacting with others. Um, but at the same time, I think it's really important to also realize that technology also plays a really important part in how we can reconnect with others and also with nature. For example, like I've been super lucky in this piece to have access to a lot of field recordings that writer and biologist David Haskell made, and also a young marine ecologist, Elliot Ma, um, is underwater recordings with special technology that they use I think they're called hydrophones, the special underwater microphones that capture. Elliot Ma is doing a great work in capturing the different what are these called harbors in New York, for example, and sonically being able to pinpoint um, how much sonic loss we're having. Um, so capturing these things through technology is a great way of realizing what's happening. Same with, with in documentaries that we see with coral reefs, with the time lapses and all of those just kind of devastating images of like how these beautiful underwater gardens that are super luscious and vivid in different colors are turning white. So and time lapses provide a very unique opportunity and insight into how these things are happening, and we can actually see them. And in the case of my piece, we can hear them. So I think there is for me, technology is another entry point to understanding things from a different perspective, to having access also to information that we didn't have before. I also make music with plants, and I'm really interested in using technology to like awaken the inner sounds of plants and organic materials. So I think for me, it's another entry point to understanding and I wish this was a given, but to access a level of empathy that maybe sometimes some of us have lost along the way because we're bombarded by so much information, by so many things that we have to care about, and that it feels overwhelming even though you want to care. So I think technology, especially when it's in the hands of a human, whether it be a scientist or an artist or a writer, can unlock a lot of potential for awakening other things that might be hiding.
And the technology is also good for letting us explore things that we don't usually get to explore within the confines of whatever our life structure is.
Exactly. Yeah, accessibility also is a huge it's it's a huge component in that too. The amount of family and friends that were able to see things that I was doing over the pandemic. That was one of the of of those things that, it's not, I don't say thank you to the pandemic, but I do say it's good that now we're aware that there are other ways of making sure that things are accessible to as many people as possible.
Right. I do want to ask you quickly about Recovecos, because I
Yeah.
love the Green Umbrella series that LA Philharmonic does. What were the hidden quarters you wanted to explore, through the programming that you created for this particular concert?
Yeah, well, I think of this is a program focused on Caribbean and Latin American composers primarily, and I think oftentimes the dia and most of the composers actually living as part of a diaspora have been displaced from home or that are living someplace else that's not their homeland. And I think oftentimes, especially in artistic or in musical concepts or programs, that is uh, oftentimes reduced to nostalgia or to this longing for home, which I think is very valid and very much a part of my experience and a lot of my colleagues that come from a similar experience. But at the same time, there's many other recovecos, right? There's many other hidden corners of and spaces of um could be that go beyond nostalgia, like I can think of like labor, I can think of catharsis, of joy, healing, of a lot of underlying complexity, especially when you come from a place, which a lot of us come from places that have like really really complex political structures, systems, um values, beliefs, and going home is not as like, oh, I get to, eat this mofongo that I love. Sure, it's that, but also it's dealing with this uncle that has always said this problematic things, or is also realizing that the place that I love to go to doesn't exist anymore. And now it's a place that there are no locals there because we've been displaced. It's complex, so it's not this over romanticized ideal of what home is, but a more nuanced um, way of acknowledging that all these things can coexist, um, and that are very much a part of someone that's trying to create a sense of belonging in two or more places simultaneously.
Right. One last thing for you, because you wrote a cello concerto or are writing a cello
Very
concerto.
much writing. Still in
You've
it.
got time. It's not until May.
Yes, yeah.
But
I was just dealing with tickets for my family who's traveling and it's sold out. And I was like, but the piece is not done. And I'm here like seeing like who's gonna sit with who and how many tickets I need for it's crazy.
it's a good problem, though, as we say.
It is, yeah.
But Yo-Yo Ma did an interview with the New York Times in December of 2022, and he said culture is able to look at the macro universe and the micro universe and bring it back to a size that we can see, feel, touch, and analyze.
Oof.
What do you see in both the macro and micro universe, and how does that find its way into your work?
Wow. I love that. You have to share that with me because just 2 days ago I've been working on it and I finally landed on a title that feels good to me and it connects a lot to what you just said, which it's a quote from Yo-Yo that I didn't know about. That's great. Um it's very reassuring. Um I I mean I think um connected to the Requiem, connected to the work I've been doing for the past few years, and to Yo-Yo's work and his legacy and his commitment um, to equity and to access and to speaking up. Um, I think a lot of the times these things can feel very large and broad and overwhelming, and but he has a way of providing, again, is this balance right between that openness with specificity that can connect with people and resonate in a way that makes them want to take action, because that's also a big part of this. I think there's there's a beautiful way in which he's a very generous person and a beautiful way in which he thinks about community, that I think also represents that balance of the macro with like the very specific local action and in the ecosystem of what an orchestra is, which is a lot of the times his he exists in many different worlds, but in the case of this piece, which is a cello concerto and the medium as an orchestra with him as a soloist. Um, one of the things he said to me was like, I'm really not so interested in someone writing me another cello concerto. That's been done. I said yes to this because I think you can reinvent what a concerto is. And I want it to be not about me, but about what I can learn from my community, which is the orchestra. Um, so for me, that was like, oh, this makes so much sense. It's by definition, a concerto is look what I can do in a way. It's showing off and it's all about this individual. But he wants it to be about what he's learning from his community, the orchestra, which I think it's a beautiful metaphor for many ways of moving forward in a moment in which, we're oftentimes just s- stuck in our own bubbles and don't know even how to communicate or how to interact with others that don't think the same way that we do. So yeah, I think there's this idea of the minuscule, super detailed with also that as a representation of something that's vast and immense feels when I talk to him about things that are happening locally in Puerto Rico in a farm and that my cousin has and when he's talking to me about other conversations that he's having with climate activists or with other artists, it feels like those all the gaps between those two extremes are possible. Yeah.
Yeah, well, all it takes is listening. Well, it takes listening. Bottom line, it just takes
Mhm.
listening, doesn't it?
Very much so.